Again, like we wanted to model for others how to. People are often scared of this because it can get political, it can get attention filled. You don't want to, make people mad by saying the wrong thing or asking the wrong question. And a lot of church and faith community spaces sometimes get really defensive when you ask questions because they feel like threatened by them or feel like that they're going to be in a way seen as irrelevant if they can't answer the question and those kinds of things. But I guarantee you, if you sit with somebody and say, you know what, I've had that same question, and even if I don't have the answer right now, let's sit with it together. Let's explore it together.
Welcome to Grub and Grace, where truth is always something to be sought after, all the while scrutinizing how different people see truth. When we live in a world full of distractions and information overload, how do we keep up with the interconnectedness of all things? We embrace the curiosity, awe, and wonder in the relationship between science, ethics, technology, history, and spirituality. Today we'll be asking the question, can faith and science coexist? While some faith circles would tell you absolutely not, we dare to ask big questions and move beyond the fallacy of a binary world. I imagine a heated debate between a Star Wars fan and a Star Trek fan deliberating on which is more superior.
Yeah.
I'm your host, Mark Flower, and I'm joined today by Pastor Will Rose. Thanks for seeing value in this podcast and wanting to come back.
Hey, Mark, thanks for having me back. I love what you do. I listen all the time, and we even rub elbows sometimes at conferences and with mutual friends and theology nerds. So, glad to be back on your podcast to talk about this subject, which is really fun for me and something that's given me a lot of energy, a lot of enrichment in my own faith and in my own ministry in my present context here in Chapel Hill, North Carolina.
Yeah, and I love whenever we connect and get together. We always tend to pull in technology somehow to the conversation.
Yeah.
I mean, our first conversation was about Captain America and the evolving technology and AI and everything in the world and how it's used for ill-gotten means and whatnot. And you always just love talking technology. And I think that's one of the aspects I just love about you too, because like you have a good sense of how you bring up certain things about technology, and you twist it in very nicely with faith and spirituality and all that stuff. So
nice.
This should be a fun conversation.
Absolutely.
Got to get the water in.
That's right. Yeah.
I was kind of trying to think if I should like jump something else in here, because I did a quick little search on like technologies and whatnot, advances over the past year, and I found a couple like cool ones. I don't know if maybe we should just kind of jump into this first before we actually jump into yours. So yeah. I wanted to talk about this one. So I saw this one. It was a textile industry that created a more environmentally friendly and reusable fabric. So a lot of fabrics nowadays integrate cotton with something else, like a polyester or some sort of like a plasticky fabric, and it makes it more difficult for those fabrics to be recycled. And I saw this, I was like, oh, I should bring this up to you. This is like perfect. This is right up your wheelhouse.
Yeah.
And so this article I wrote, it said only 8% of fibers are made from recycled sources. But this one, researchers at Avantium and the University of Amsterdam have recently developed a breakthrough recycling process that may solve this issue. So their sequential chemical recycling uses highly concentrated hydrochloric acid. It says 43 weight percentile HCI at room temperature to separate cotton and polyester in mixed waste textiles. So far, it's achieved a 75% recovery rate of cotton as glucose and 78% recovery rate of polyester monomers. Technology is moving to a demonstration plant in 2026, so they're going to start mass producing all this stuff, which is perfect. Let capitalism do its thing. I mean, if they can recycle, 75% of the cotton and 78% is what this says of the polyester monomers. That's awesome that they can like actually be able to recycle these things and use them in other fabrics and not have to create new materials out of it and be able to recycle all these. So I thought that was kind of a cool little thing I noticed.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like humans will find a way, life will find a way, humans will find a way to hopefully solve a problem. Like we create lots of problems and we produce a lot of waste, and we kind of catch up like, this isn't a good idea. This isn't good. What can we do to help solve this? So the human spirit and creativity and imagination is a good thing. It's a gift. And so doing things like this to help our environment with the clothes we wear and what we're putting into the system is that's great news, and hopefully more will do it. People will catch on. It reminds me also, like, I grew up on the East Coast, a big time surfer, and so there's a lot of surf companies that are mindful that what the arena or the environment we play in with surfing, the ocean, need to take care of it. And so thinking about the kind of sunscreens we use, the type of material that we put on our body when we swim or surf with wetsuits, or even the actual surfboards that they're made out of, or shipping material that we ship the clothes and the sunscreen and the surfboards to surf shops in. Maybe we shouldn't use like styrofoam and plastics, but there's other things. So they've used like this kind of mushroom, a biodegradable substance. The New Earth Project is another environmental kind of project and organization. I don't know if they're for profit or non for profit, but they really kind of help reduce plastics, and mainly in shipping. Like you're shipping these surfboards all across the world from shapers to surf shops, so you can play in the ocean. Why are you using styrofoam and plastics to ship them in? So they're finding different materials, biodegradable materials to ship them in. And mushrooms being one of them. So pretty neat that we are able to do those kinds of things. And so, yeah, we're going to talk about a group that I'm a part of called the Lutheran Alliance for Faith, Science, and Technology. And there's a reason that we have technology in there. It's not just faith and science, but technology is a big part of what makes us humans and what we do as humans in the world. And how does it help? How does it hurt? Being mindful of how we use these tools and technology is a big part of what we do, kind of theologically, philosophically, but just how we do life together. So yeah, good stuff. I love it.
I love it. And, it kind of makes me think of all this stuff that you're mentioning here with like changing the way surfboards are made and what kind of materials they're made out of, and how that, impacts like climate change and everything like that. And, I think of like Grace G. Sun Kim, and she just wrote a book this last year. She wrote an entire book about, climate change and what we can do. That goes right into it, is, what kind of materials are we using that when they break down and, snap in the ocean, little bits fall off. That, of course, won't biodegrade and all that kind of stuff. And, of course, that feeds into impacts for, like, marine life, and that impacts the rest of the world as you come to. So, but this all goes into what we're talking about today, is that you kicked off a podcast project that can be used as a tool for people. What you're hoping, at least, and the podcast is called Your Matter Matters. And so you, like in the intro for this episode that I cited, was going into asking these big questions: can science and faith coexist with each other? And I listened to all your episodes. I really like the conversations that you had and the guests that you had on. I feel like you did the work to find people that were very educated and very well spoken in these areas that you spoke on. You speak on like astrophysics, you speak on like AI, you speak on all these very scientific and space related science, climate change, like all this stuff. And it was just such an interesting listen. So I don't know if you could maybe kind of share a little bit about this project and everything.
Yeah. Thanks for listening, Mark, and thanks for allowing me a space to talk about it. Yeah, so this, I'm trying to think of where my origin story with science. Like, okay, so I went to college on the East Coast, University of North Carolina at Wilmington, which is a beach school there in Wilmington. I was thinking I was going to go to marine biology because I just wanted to surf and play with dolphins and do that kind of thing. But when I took my first lab, I realized it wasn't going to be just play in the ocean and surf all the time, that you had to be scientifically minded with biology and microbiology and all those things. So I shifted. But this big science questions have always intrigued me. And then when I got into ministry and youth ministry, I realized whenever students or youth or even really people of all ages, when they had the big questions, they'd pull me aside and be like, hey, I have questions about how the Bible relates to a scientific worldview. How does Genesis 1 and 2 relate to evolution? What about the scale of the universe? Pain and suffering? What does all this mean? So these big science questions were bumping up against and causing some friction with our theology and religious questions, which, it's nothing new. It's gone all the way back to the beginning when it's with Galileo and the church and scientific discoveries were being made. It's nothing new, but just the one-on-one, face-to-face relational ministry that I was a part of, the big questions that people were wrestling with revolved around how does the Bible and our faith relate to a scientific worldview? So I became more curious, and there's a couple options there. You could just deny science and say, just read the Bible and that's all you need and stick your head in the sand and reject science. Or the science could say, well, religion is an ancient myth that's been shown to be outdated, and so move on, grow up. You shouldn't believe in fairy tales anymore. So those are kind of your options, but there's a lot of really smart people who have done a lot of work with faith and science, and who are people who vocationally are in the sciences, but also people of faith and go to church and treasure their faith. And so there's a lot of people in between. A lot of time in today's age, you just kind of look, there's this kind of gotcha culture. You just got owned culture. You look up faith and science on YouTube, and there's a debate of the fundamentalist Christian versus the fundamentalist scientist, and how they see the world, and their battle to the end. And that's kind of what people stereotype it is. But really, this podcast, Your Matter Matters, is our tagline is a faith and science podcast where we keep the and in faith and science. To let people know that there's a lot of resources, people, books who do the and, who do the both and, who navigate both. And doesn't mean there aren't tension, doesn't mean there aren't problems or things that, that we really have to wrestle with. But awe, wonder, and curiosity is a common ground that both faith and science can play in. And so that's what we sought to do with this project. Is over the years, I'm at Holy Trinity Lutheran in Chapel Hill, so we have a lot of students and grad students, professors who are learning about the sciences or teach the sciences, evolutionary biologists, astrophysicists, all particle physicists, all those kind of vocations in scientific research. And so over the years, we've had a lot of conversations and asked a lot of questions and wrestled with questions and even come up with maybe a few answers here and there or approaches that we think is healthy. And so when a friend of mine who also serves on the steering committee for the Lutheran Alliance for Faith, Science, and Technology, Thomas came to me and said, our synod, the North Carolina Synod, our denominational kind of structure organization, has a mini grant or give grants. Would you like to do a podcast about faith and science and promote the Alliance and the resources like BioLogos and Science for the Church and friends like Trip Fuller who have good conversations around faith and science on their podcast and homebrew Christianity? Is like, maybe we should do a podcast, a mini series to sum up some of the things that we've learned over the years and then use it or put it out there in a way that other congregations can listen and help their congregations to spark awe, wonder, curiosity, and show people how to have a healthy conversation around this. And not be scared to ask the question. They have permission to ask the question. They let them know they're not alone. Our pastoral approach is like, you know what? You're not the first or last person to ask these types of questions. And so be honest with each other and have a good conversation. So that's what we did. We came up with kind of the top 5 questions that always come up when it comes to faith and science. These aren't all the questions by far. We don't solve the mystery or answer the question, a nice tweetable answer at the end of each episode, but really we just kind of introduce the subject. It's kind of like Faith and Science 101. We want the basics of kind of what the problem or the question or the curiosity is around these subjects, and then we provide resources that people want to go deeper to that. So that's what we put together, this little mini series that we're hoping congregations and small groups can use it like a pod study. People have book studies all the time. They read a book together and they read a chapter and come back and talk about it, or read a whole book and get together with wine or pizza or something and have a conversation. That's what we wanted this podcast to be, is listen to it and then come together in community, in small groups with friends or your community of faith and have a good conversation. I guarantee you it'll spark wonder, curiosity, and more questions. You're like, I'm curious about this now. I need to go even further with that. So that's kind of where we are with it, and it was a lot of fun.
I love that. Eat a little grub, have a little grace for one another for different ideas, and just have a big conversation around it.
On brand. brand, Mark. There you go.
And I love that, like asking big questions, having that curiosity. And you have never really been one to shy away from asking big questions about, faith, science, and philosophy, and just anything along that. I mean, your podcast, it's a pretty short. It's like 7 episodes long, including your intro episode and your kind of like your conclusion episode, I guess you could say, where you just kind of talk about your discussions that you had before. And like you said, it is kind of set up like you could have like a small group discussion, like a seven week, discussion about this. You meet like once a week and you have wine, have some food, have good discussion about what you guys listen to. And that way you can just, everyone can listen at their own pace throughout that week. And then when they, get together, they can share their thoughts of notes they've taken or whatever it is. And the episodes aren't that long. I mean, an hour. But if you think spread an hour over a week, that gives you some time to even re-listen to it once or twice more, take some notes. If there's anything that really stood out to you, what they said. And like I said, your guest, you did a good job, you and Thomas Johnson, your co-host, did a good job of collecting good people to talk on these subjects for. And they're very interesting.
It helps to have good friends and people that also do this kind of work. So there's a lot of people that I reached out to, and it's I really want to talk to Jim Stump from BioLogos. He has a great book on evolution, and he's been in my earbuds a lot with the BioLogos Language of God podcast and over the years. And so getting his email and him hopping on was super fun. Ted Peters, who is a Lutheran theologian who I've read about and read of and heard speak a number of times, I haven't really talked to. He was like a dream guest for me. And there are other connections that we, through mutual friends, are hey, they'd be really good to talk to. And most of the time when you're hey, it's just a 45-minute conversation, and we have some grant money. We'd love to give you an honorarium for coming to talk. People like doing that kind of stuff. And I was really, Dr. Ann Forrest, who on our subject AI, I was very proud of this. She, we told her, it's just going to be 45 minutes. She's cool, because I got to teach at 3 o'clock. We're all right, cool. And as we're talking, I'm all right, Ann, you said you have to teach. We need to wrap this up. She goes, no, I'm having fun having this conversation. I just emailed my students and told them I canceled class today. We can keep talking. I was oh, that's so cool. You're welcome, students. You're welcome. Your teacher just canceled class because they're having fun talking about AI and the emergence of all kinds of technologies and what does it mean to be human. And so yeah, that was fun. And I think, again, we wanted to model for others people are often scared of this because it can get political, it can get attention filled. You don't want to, make people mad by saying the wrong thing or asking the wrong question. And a lot of church and faith community spaces sometimes get really defensive when you ask questions because they feel threatened by them or feel that they're going to be, in a way, seen as irrelevant if they can't answer the question and those kinds of things. But I guarantee you, if you sit with somebody and say, you know what, I've had that same question, and even if I don't have the answer right now, let's sit with it together. Let's explore it together. I have no problem when youth ask me a complicated question to say, that's a good one. I don't know the answer off the top of my head. You know what, let me research that. Let me get back to you. You're not alone. You know what, so-and-so asked that same question. Maybe we can all get together for coffee and talk about it. It just disarms people, and you don't have to feel you have to compete or feel scared that you're going to lose something because of it. And I think often the stereotype with faith and science of why they battle with each other, because on the science level or the religious faith side, there's this fear of losing influence and power and resources. So, back between Galileo and the Roman Catholic Church, they just came off the Reformation. And so they were really scared when you decenter the earth. And you're going to decenter the church, they're going to lose power and influence, and oh gosh, here we go again. So they're really fighting against that in defensive mode. And I think they learned their lesson, because when here comes evolution, the Roman Catholic Church didn't have a problem with evolution. They were able to look at the science and talk about it and see the scriptures through a lens where an evolving universe isn't something that will derail your faith. So they kind of learned their lesson from cosmology, and I think handled the theory of scientific understanding of evolution in a healthy way. So anyway, I think through this podcast, we want to model how to have a healthy conversation that you could do with your youth, your young adult group, with your Bible study forum, that you can have these conversations in a healthy way. It doesn't have to be a big battle and fight and all that kind of stuff. So that's what we try to model for folks to do.
Yeah, and it's good to have that model. There's something about it when you find someone else that kind of has that affinity of wanting to ask those big questions and not feeling threatened with their own beliefs, willing to be pushed a little bit and have that openness. There's something nice and honestly fun about those kind of conversations. And like what you're sharing about is like when those like church traditions and people within kind of the upper echelons of those losing that power and influence, and that trickles down to the congregation where they're constantly being told this is the truth or this is what you should believe, and it becomes kind of a core identity of these people. So when I was in that tradition too, and we were too, and growing up, and I'm sure you still have some of that feeling in you that there's probably certain topics that touches and it just kind of irks you the wrong way, and it's like, I don't know if I want to go there yet.
Yeah.
But give it a little time, ask some questions over time that will slowly kind of allow you to open up and to see more. And and I was kind of wondering, like, you're hoping with having this as kind of like a small group discussion, kind of study tools. What do you hope that people will get out of this, listening to your series and delving into it?
Yeah, I think that's it. I'm a pastor at heart. I'm a pastor of a medium-sized congregation here on the doorstep of University of North Carolina with students and campus ministry and stuff. And so often I've learned when people bring their questions to you, my pastoral care approach is to reassure them, one, not to shame them for their question, one, to let them know they're not alone in that question, that you have someone walking alongside them as they explore the question together. And so that's exactly what we wanted this podcast to be, is to say, you know what, you're not alone. I guarantee you, if you haven't asked one of these questions, you will at some point in your life. And then remind you that you're not alone in those questions. And then there are some people who have really smart, caring people who have wrestled with the same question that you have wrestled with. They've either written a book about it or a blog about it or have a Substack that can help guide you in those things. There's lots of resources of people who have explored, whether they're really thick academic books or just like Emily Smith when we did the one on the science of healthcare, the science of the Good Samaritan. She really shares personal stories of how healthcare done well can really help society, and when done poorly can really destroy community and lives. And her episode was just a neat way to kind of not just the heady, are there aliens on other planets, and what if that, but also like here in the ground level, how we take care of our neighbor and using the parable of the Good Samaritan that Jesus taught. So yeah, it's that pastoral approach that we did. Thomas and I are both Lutheran pastors and pastors at heart, and so just to let people know we're walking beside you. You're not alone in these, and that there's a ton of resources. When I first started getting into faith and science, grab a book here and there, and then you pull that thread, you go a little deeper, like, there are a lot of smart people. There are a lot of books. It's not just those kind of extremes on opposite polar binaries of each other battling to the end. There's a lot of people there in the middle who are like, really care about it and have written some really cool stuff and done some really neat projects around these subjects and topics. So we also wanted to just promote other people's work, to say there's a lot of resources. And so, yeah, like you have a whole week to listen to an hour episode of podcast. You might pause it, go look up somebody's name or something we talked about, Google it, go down a rabbit hole, go pull a thread and see where it leads you. You might find a book that you're, oh, cool, and start reading that book and then come back to it. So that's what we're hoping. That, in the awe, wonder, curiosity, when we talk about the common ground with scientists and people of faith, and often when that awe, wonder, curiosity, you're asking questions of like, what does this mean and why is it happening? And even on the very scientific research level, people are still asking the question why, and then that immediately turns to, what does this mean for me and my loved ones, the community, those I care about? What does it mean to be human? What's my relationship to others? Is there a moral arc to the universe? Those big philosophical, theological questions are bound to come up somewhere, whatever you're talking about, whether it's cosmology or artificial intelligence.
So one of the things that I usually get out with my own conversations of this podcast are the people that I talk to. And typically with just about every person I have on here, they always say something that just like makes me think or, expands my process of how I should think about things. So what was the biggest thing that you pulled from your experience creating this podcast?
Good question. Yeah, I think every episode you can. The way we structured it is that we introduced the guest, we had a good conversation, and then Thomas and I would spend 5 or 10 minutes going, "Oh, what stuck out for you?" So we were able to kind of share kind of what you would do in a Sunday school class or book study, Bible study. But I would say each guest definitely like sparked some wonder, awe, and curiosity of wanting to go deeper. But I will say Dr. Ted Peters talking about cosmology, astrotheology, life on other planets, the scale of the universe, and how it relates to Genesis 1 and chapter 2. He said something that I think I've heard before, or maybe heard, but just didn't really digest it and consume it. But he said, maybe Genesis chapter 1 with those allegorical 7 days of creation isn't necessarily where we've been, but where we're headed. And that just blew me away. I'm like, oh, we're in the midst of it. God's not done with creation yet. We're in the midst of that. As we're recording this, we're a couple weeks from Easter, and Easter can sometimes be seen theologically as the 8th day of creation, a new creation, that Christ is the firstborn of a new creation that's going to emerge, that we're all invited to be a part of and partake of. And for me to think about that, we're in the first chapter of Genesis, and yeah, we're around the time of the age of humans, but we haven't reached the 7th day yet. We haven't reached the 8th day yet. We haven't reached Sabbath. We practice it so that when it gets to us, it's more palatable, that we can accept it more or live into it more. Maybe that's what we're called to do, is to practice Sabbath so that when we do reach that at some point, then it's more palatable. So that blew me away to think about that. Genesis isn't something that's seen as far in the distance, but we're in the midst of now, and we haven't reached yet. And that blew me away. I still think about it every day after that conversation. It was just a throwaway line. He probably doesn't even think about it. Dr. Ted Peters, does he not thinking about it one bit right now, months after we've recorded this? He doesn't care, but it's haunting me, and I can't stop thinking about it. It's like we're headed that direction. That's where we're headed, and at least that's my hope. That's where my faith leads me. So that was big. And then I will share another one, the AI discussion. Dr. Amforce, when we were talking about data and AI and where we are and big language models, that kind of stuff, she talked about how dumb AI is, in a sense that we're the ones who are information. And then her whole big thing was like, yeah, there can't be self-awareness without embodiment. And that's why she went to MIT and does a lot with robotics. She's like, yeah, if there's a robot body and AI, then maybe can be some self-awareness or singularity of intelligence or self-awareness, because they take up space in the world and they embody it. So thinking about being embodied in the world, that I'm not just a brain of ideas and data, but I experience the world through touch and feel and hormones and emotions, and even within my gut, I have microorganisms that shape how I feel from day to day. Like all that stuff is a part of who I am as Will, not only just what I intake of what you tell me information, I take it within my whole self. And so her thinking about robotics and AI as being self-aware, her talking about embodiment was something that I've been thinking about lately, especially with the arms race with AI. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Vega?
Yeah, the whole like brain without a body kind of featured. What if we were to move forward and allow AI to engage with the physical space in the world, and what that might look like? It sounds like she thinks, regardless, it's still just our input into something that's, it's what we tell it to be. And it kind of makes me think of like reverse, like you think of like sci-fi where they put like a head in a jar of a human, like look at Fallout, the latest season, or or even like Futurama or something like that, where there's just like always someone with the head in a jar that's just interacting with the world. Would that revert them into just like a binary head in a jar, just not taking up physical space and not having the physical touch and feel? What would that do to the brain, I guess you could say? It's interesting. And then the whole creation account, that whole thing was really cool, not looking at what had happened but will happen in the future, what's to come, and what we're looking forward to. And because typically whenever I think of like the creation account now, I think of the first and the second creation account. I'm blanking. What's the first book of the Bible?
Oh, Genesis.
Genesis. How did I forget that? The first Genesis account, whereas the first Genesis account and the second one. So you get Genesis 1, then Genesis 2, you get that second one. I don't know if you've heard too much about the two Genesis accounts. I've always grown up with it. There's just being the one, and then apologetics, links the two together. But
they're two different sources. Like you have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the four different gospels from different writers. You have these two creation accounts from two different sources, and the early forefathers of our faith who put the canon of Scripture together were okay with putting them side by side, even if they weren't like 100% in agreement or whatever. They're giving a theological point of view, similar to like Matthew being right next to Mark in the Gospels. So yeah, and sometimes and fundamentalism will try to harmonize it and put them together and all those kind of things, not allowing them to be what they were originally meant to be. But yeah, that, and those days of creation of Genesis 1, if you look at it, it's not like, it doesn't mirror evolutionary biology, in terms of how things were, but it is pretty interesting to me that the people who are using the science of the day was just observation. Their eyeballs knew that you couldn't have life without water, so it starts with water. And then you end with more complex organisms of human beings. So along that scale of things getting more complicated and things evolving in the universe, they were smart people too. They were looking through their eyeballs at what the science of the day, just through observation and repeated experience, which is kind of what happens in the lab for evolutionary biologists today. Repeatable experiments kind of test and prove. But yeah, so I think sometimes we make the Bible and these stories more than what they are meant to be, but what gives, there are people who have a different way of interpreting or lens by which to look at the Scripture that are just as legit as those who feel like you only have to read the Bible in one way. And there's a lot of smart people out there who do that interpreting and use those hermeneutics to help us understand what the Scriptures are saying and then how to apply it to our life. That I think is really respectful, and I love it.
Yeah, it's kind of the whole definitive, between like a definitive or definition. It's kind of like a descriptive way versus a prescriptive way of reading the text. You can label things descriptive, what the text is saying, and you can look into that further. But then when people start making it prescriptive, and this is how you should live because of this, and dictating it on people, and if we could just check the prescriptive side of it and just talk about the descriptive side, I think we'd have a lot more open dialogue about what the Bible says, what science says, how do these two maybe go together, do they align, like ask these big questions about that sort of thing, like you were talking about, like Genesis kind of sort of aligning with the thought of evolution, of starting off with the basic things of life, water, air, all that kind of stuff, and then you go up with smaller organisms to larger organisms and how light and synthesis and all that kind of stuff work into it, and then the order of that through the 7 days that it describes. So I thought it was kind of cool, and it's a fun way of looking at it. Like,
well said.
Let's have some fun with science.
Let's have some fun. Have fun. And I will say a good resource that we bring up on the podcast is Jim Stump's book, The Sacred Chain. He talks about, to talk about evolution, and as people of faith, you have to wrestle with Scripture. And he talks about ways to interpret Scripture and way to handle the Bible. And it's not just a house of cards ready to fall down if you don't believe literally this particular verse or chapter. And he sets up in that book a really, I think, a healthy way of how to look at Scripture and a vantage point to look at Scripture, even tying in some, what conservatives and evangelicals can agree with is that, we're all fans of C.S. Lewis, and he brings in some C.S. Lewis understanding of how to look at Scripture. And I think I couldn't recommend that book enough either. If you're really thinking seriously about, like, I'm trying to wrap my head around how the creation accounts match up or walk with or deal with evolution and the scientific understanding of evolution, that book, The Sacred Chain, is a must read.
It's awesome. Now, one thing that I feel like every time you're talking about technology and whatnot, you always bring up, like, the idea that scares you is who's actually going to be behind the AI and, like, new technology and all that kind of stuff. And and of course now what we're seeing with Iran and world events and everything like that, who's behind that. And this isn't necessarily a Republican or Democrat thing. Both parties and leaders and whatnot throughout history have done atrocious things, regardless of what party they're affiliated with. But it's always that, it's like the people that are in charge. And I, like, whenever you say this on your episodes or just conversation with you, it makes me think of what's his name, Frederick Guthrie. So in World War I, he's the one that created the mustard gas, or attributed to being like the main name behind mustard gas, which actually isn't a gas at all, but which is interesting to looking into it. But he was actually just looking in how like compounds and how they interact with each other and kind of figuring out this new stuff. And he came across mustard gas, or the sulfuric dichride, and they basically utilize that as a weapon of war. And it always makes you think of that as like, these technologies are always brought up and created and discovered and all sorts of things, but it's a matter of how we use it, who's behind making the decisions of how they're used. They could be used for good, for science, for discovery, or they could be weaponized and used against the people. And it's always scary to see that. And then how does our theology kind of come into that? What is, as Christians, what does Jesus say about this kind of stuff? What does the Bible say about this kind of stuff? How should we live accordingly with, Spider-Man's uncle would say, with great power comes great responsibility.
Yeah.
Got to bring in those nerdy.
Gotta do it.
But how do you see kind of like how theology comes into play with the creation of these technologies and who's behind them?
Yeah, and we'd give that into podcasts a little bit too, and bring up, it's, again, like humans, the way we operate in the world, we create tools to help augment or supplement our lives, but it also affects the environment around us, as we talked about the environment and what we use in terms of clothes and that kind of thing. But yeah, humans created hammers so they could build buildings and build structures and build homes and create safer and more firm shelter. But yet we were like, oh, you know what I could also do with this hammer? I could also smash my neighbor's face in if I get a disagree with them. So it's a tool to use to augment and help us. Humans have a propensity to also turn those tools into weapons. And so whether it's fire, whether it's hammers, whether it's gunpowder or chemical compounds, or even AI, can we use it in a way that makes our lives better and our neighbor better and healthy and help people flourish? Or are we going to use it as a weapon to lord over and control or get rid of the neighbor who we don't like or love? And so that's the danger. And so there will always be philosophical and theological questions and ethical questions that goes along with the tools that we create, because whether it's automobiles with gasoline or electricity or phones, yeah, it's great. We have a phone in my pocket. I have a computer in my pocket, but also has algorithms that devise a way to keep scrolling, and that dopamine hit and all those things. You would think, oh, cool, I can just text Mark anytime I want, even though he lives half a day's journey away from me. Mm-hmm. But also, it can also be used as a way to manipulate. So those questions should always walk alongside the technologies we use. And unfortunately, we often create technology and we think about the ethical and philosophical, theological questions after the fact rather than beforehand. And so I do think when we talk about Ted Peters on that one, talking about aliens, there has been some forethought of people who have gotten together. What if we get visited tomorrow from someone from outer space who has intelligence and intelligent life, consciousness? How would we react? What are the questions we would ask? Thinking through different scenarios, that forethought is there. Now, obviously, there are things going to happen, things are going to emerge that you can't predict. But in planning, think through, how do I want to be and operate in the world, before these things emerge, and that'll help guide how we use them. So yeah, it is an important topic, and why we put it in the top 5, it's like AI. 5-10 years ago wouldn't have been in the top 5, but technology has, bioethics have, how we use tech around us have always been a part of our big philosophical and theological questions. So I think it's still there, and AI is going to press us on that. AI is not going anywhere, so we got to think through now. Let's do it now. Let's think through how we use this, why we use this, what are ethical ways to use this. Now is the time to think about those things, the urgency, rather than waiting for later where we react to something. Let's be proactive with it first.
I love it. All these big questions, just, it's good to think about it. And it's good to kind of, like you were saying, like ask these big questions before you need to think about them, instead of, asking about them in the midst of it or after the fact. And that's what I'm trying to do with, like, I'm reading, Karl Marx, and I'm trying to understand, how systems work. And I read other critical thinkers in that way. And
Absolutely.
Understanding systems so that when you see things happen, you can understand, okay, this is how everything kind of ties in. So you can ask the big questions of who's benefiting, how does this hurt people, all these big questions that kind of revolve around that. And look forward to what's going to happen possibly in the future because XYZ happened. What's next after Z? Asking those big questions. And you do quite a bit with this project that you have, Your Matter Matters, you and Thomas, and it's a big undertaking to do this, and everyone that's involved with this project. Starting this project, it was a lot to kind of start. First, you have to kind of think of the ideas, what you want to do, and then you start writing things down, implementing them. Getting funding, however big or small your project wants to be, for hosting and the equipment and all that kind of stuff. And it's a big undertaking, and then it takes a lot to edit and actually post it, and then social media and everything like that. So creating something from scratch can feel like a daunting task, which is why many people shy away from even beginning. Or once they jump into it, they realize how much work is necessary in order to accomplish their dreams, or they get overwhelmed. What would you say to someone who might want to start their own podcast or own project, whatever that might look like?
Yeah, I think, again, you don't have to start from scratch. There are people out there. Reach out to friends, reach out to people. Everybody, there's a lot of podcasts out there and people who do it really well. So yeah, do your homework and reach out to people to get some help. We would not have been able to do this without Joshua, who's done a lot of hours of editing and producing those kinds of things. And we have, it's take years of working up relationships and entering into these conversations with people to be able to get someone's email and say, hey, we've done some work in this. You want to come on board and be a part of the conversation. So it's not something you just I'm going to create this and I'm going to be expert in it next week. It's putting your hours, putting your 10,000 hours. And part of the reason this podcast was able to come in, it was a lot of work and doing the interviews, and it took months and months to put it together. But it also took years of just having conversations and practicing how the conversation and feel comfortable around these questions that we got enough content. We've had this conversation before. I know these books. I know these people. Let's have a good conversation with it. And it's because we put in those relational hours first before we just hopped behind the mic and started just talking. There's a lot of relational hours. And so there's relationships and communities. Build that first. Get your team together. And then once you get your team together, put it out there and see how people respond. And I'm really appreciative. And so, yeah, even it wasn't that long ago. This podcast came out in January in hopes that people would use it this spring, but maybe over the summer or next fall. And some of our students, our campus ministry, Sylvie came up to me and was like, I'm taking a biology class. I was thinking about evolution. Can you help me with that? And I was like, hey, it's funny you should ask that. Yes, we can talk about it, but also Jim Stump has a book called The Sacred Chain. Also, we did an episode and a conversation with him. If you don't want to read the book, listen to what he talks about in 45 minutes. And so that was really helpful to her. And so it's really neat to see how things come up, and you're like, oh yeah, we've done some work in that. Let me point you in that direction. But again, I would say the pastor in me, the friend in me, the person who really loves people in me, build those relational hours first, community first, and then get your team together. And yeah, there you go. Can't do it alone.
Right on. And also, I mean, a lot of people think a lot of the content out there is really well produced. You got good cameras, good audio equipment. We've got our microphones. I've got this nice camera that's adding a lot of depth of field behind me. And a lot of people might see that on social media and think I need all this nice stuff to be able to start. No, you literally just, if you want to start a podcast, you literally just need a microphone. You don't need a camera. You don't need anything. You could use your phone, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
And there are people out there that do that. If you have something to say, just do it. You just have to spend a little money on hosting for your episodes, and that's about it. And a lot of these programs, you can find even free programs. I'm using a program that has a free free aspect of it, and I know there's a couple other kind of freeware recording softwares where you can do these video calls or do these recording calls where you can talk to each other. download the files, and then and some of these programs will actually have like editing capability in there, so it'll level the audio and whatnot. So if you're thinking about that and you're worried about, oh, I need to get all this stuff, no, like if you have something to say, just start, just pay for your hosting and just jump into it, and it's as easy as that. So
and then share with a friend, and then they'll share with their friend, and then that's how you build kind of your audience and platform. Another podcast I'm on that you've been on, Systematic Ecology. We're using YouTube. I got into podcasting not necessarily because I wanted to be on YouTube, but that's kind of where the trend went. But we did audio for Your Matter Matters. There's no YouTube videos, but we're thinking about like maybe a video series where you could even, maybe season 2 we are on YouTube, and you could bring up some PowerPoints and subjects where people could watch together, and like a PowerPoint presentation of what's going on, and they can use it as a class that way. Maybe we'll level up and do that in the fall. But there's different ways to do it, and so yeah, why not?
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, I don't know if you wanted to add anything else about Your Matter Matters, but of course, if my listeners want to find, they've already heard you talk on a couple of my episodes, but if they do want to find you, maybe you can kind of restate where they could find you on like social media or other podcast platforms.
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram, Facebook. Your Matter Matters is on Instagram. Give us a follow. I try to highlight episodes and reshare good stuff that's out there. We may do a bonus 8th episode at some point. I have a sabbatical coming towards me this summer. Take a couple months to recharge and read books and travel a little bit. Maybe before I go on sabbatical, do an 8th bonus episode of kind of follow up with what we're hearing, what people are enjoying, and what extra questions people want to see if we do a season 2. And so follow us on Instagram and share us around. And then I'm on Instagram, Facebook, and then also Systematic Ecology, another podcast I'm on, and then often team up with Joshua on other projects too. So Josh and Noel. Follow the Anazal podcast network. A lot of good, diverse podcasts on that network, whether it's geeky stuff or theology stuff or ecumenical stuff. Now you have a faith and science podcast on that network too. So that's pretty fun.
Yeah, or I had just had Joshua Noel on. We talked about Vincent van Gogh, which was a super fascinating guy. Honestly, you guys should talk about him on Systematic Ecology. I think it would be super interesting. But
nice.
Joshua Noel's already pretty up to speed on him, so he'd be a good person to have on for that one. But
yeah, and I also share like the final. I love that on our final episode 7, we closed out with a hymn. So, we let theopoetics and a hymn and music and art have the final word and final say in the whole podcast. We don't even follow it up and try to talk about it. We talk about it beforehand. I had my worship and music person that's at my church on that one where we talk about this hymn. We commissioned a hymn with Science for the Church because often our ancient beloved hymns are seeing the world from a non-scientific point of view. They're from the early 1500s or 1200s or way back when, thousands of year old hymn that we love, and they're beautiful and they capture the grace of God in a powerful way. But where are the modern day hymns written in the last 5, 10, 20 years, 50 years that capture how we understand a scientific world along with our faith in the Bible? They're far and few between. So we commissioned a hymn called From Wonder to Wisdom, and using scientific language while capturing awe, wonder, and beauty, and how we understand God to be. So we close with the hymn. And if you like that hymn, it is usable. As long as you cite it and you do the copyright, you could use that in your own context and use it in your hymnody at your church and your faith community. So I'm really proud of that hymn that we commissioned and had someone write and create, and then be able to use it for the podcast. And then hopefully it'll make some hymnal someday out there in the world. It'd be kind of fun.
There you go. That sounds like a good resource to have. Yeah, thanks for sharing about that.
Yeah.
Well, Will, I don't really have anything more to talk about this. I think, stop listening to my episode and go to Your Matter Matters and listen to the short 7 episode limited series they have going out now. I can't wait for season 2 whenever you guys do that, or the 8th episode that you're teasing right now.
Yeah.
I can't wait for that to come out because it was a fun listen. I think there's a lot of really good stuff that kind of pushed my thinking of as far as like how to think about these subjects. So I really appreciate you, appreciate Thomas, and I appreciate everyone like Joshua Noel and everyone else that got involved with this project. It was a good listen. I know like you mentioned before we started recording, Trip Fuller, he kind of dabbles and covers a lot of this stuff as far as science and theology, but I think having your resource and out there is another really good resource for people to listen to on these subjects. and expand their not just understanding, but just allow them to ask quite big questions. So I appreciate you, and I thank you for putting this out there.
I appreciate it, Mark. And again, if something sparks something in you or a question or want to go more, you can always DM me and reach out. I'll be happy to talk with you, chat with you, steer you in a direction and discern with you where to go. So feel free to reach out anytime. No question, don't question, unless it has some agenda behind it. And then, I can sniff those out pretty easily. No, but anyway, I would love to hear from folks and let me know what you think about it. Do we have some blind spots? Other questions that sparked in you we could put in season 2. We're creating a list as we go. So appreciate it, Mark. Thanks for what you do, and thanks for having me on.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for being on.